Captain Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of serving her country. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her father polish his military boots every Sunday morning, telling stories of brotherhood and honor that filled her young heart with purpose. When she graduated from the Naval Academy at 22, her parents beamed with pride as she received her commission as a Marine officer. Sarah was different from most officers. She didn't lead from behind a desk or bark orders from a safe distance. She walked alongside her Marines, sharing their meals, their jokes, and their fears. Her unit, the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, stationed at Camp Pendleton, knew they could count on her. She remembered every Marine's birthday, knew their families' names, and never asked them to do something she wouldn't do herself. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a remote village in Afghanistan. The mission was clear: capture or neutralize the terrorist leader who had been coordinating attacks on civilian populations. Sarah's unit was chosen for the operation because of their exceptional track record and tight-knit teamwork. As Sarah briefed her Marines, she looked into each of their faces. There was Rodriguez, barely 19, who sent half his paycheck home to his sick mother. Thompson, the joker of the group, who could make anyone laugh even in the darkest moments. Williams, the quiet one who carried pictures of his newborn daughter everywhere. These weren't just soldiers to Sarah. They were her family. The preparation took 3 days. They studied satellite images, practiced the assault countless times, and checked their equipment over and over. Sarah knew that attention to detail could mean the difference between coming home and not coming home at all. She spent the evening before deployment writing letters to each Marine's family, something she did before every dangerous mission, just in case. On the night before they shipped out, Sarah sat outside her quarters looking at the stars. She thought about her father's words. Leadership isn't about being the toughest or the smartest. Sarah, it's about caring more about your people than you care about yourself. She had never understood those words more clearly than she did that night, knowing that tomorrow she would lead 50 Marines into harm's way. The helicopters touched down in the Afghan mountains just before dawn. The air was thin and cold, and the landscape looked like another planet with its rocky terrain and scattered villages. Sarah's Marines moved like shadows, their training evident in every step. They had rehearsed this operation so many times that each man knew exactly what to do without being told. The target building was a compound surrounded by high walls, situated in a valley between 2 ridgelines. Intelligence suggested the terrorist leader was inside, planning another attack on a school in Kabul. The mission had to be swift and precise. Any delay would give the enemy time to escape or call for reinforcements. Sarah positioned her Marines in 3 teams. Alpha Team would breach the main gate, Bravo Team would secure the perimeter, and Charlie Team would provide overwatch from the surrounding hills. As the operation commander, Sarah would lead Alpha Team into the compound. It was dangerous, but she had never asked her Marines to take risks she wasn't willing to take herself. At precisely 05:30 hours, the assault began. Alpha Team moved through the breach with military precision, clearing room by room. The compound was larger than expected, with several buildings connected by covered walkways. Sarah's team found evidence of recent activity: warm food, fresh clothing, and ammunition scattered throughout the rooms. Then everything changed in an instant. As Sarah's team entered the main building, they triggered a hidden explosive device. The blast was deafening and smoke filled the air. When the dust settled, Sarah realized they had walked into a trap. The terrorist leader had anticipated their arrival and had booby-trapped the entire compound. Sarah quickly assessed the situation. 3 of her Marines were wounded, including Rodriguez, who had taken shrapnel in his leg. Enemy fighters began firing from concealed positions throughout the compound. What was supposed to be a quick capture mission had become a desperate fight for survival. Sarah grabbed her radio and called for immediate medical evacuation while returning fire at the enemy positions. The firefight intensified as more enemy reinforcements arrived. Sarah and her Marines found themselves pinned down in a courtyard with limited cover. Ammunition was running low, and the nearest friendly forces were 20 minutes away. Sarah knew she had to make a decision that would determine whether her Marines made it home alive. Sarah looked at her wounded Marines and made a decision that would define her legacy. The enemy had positioned themselves in a building that overlooked the courtyard where her team was trapped. From that position, they could pick off her Marines one by one. The only way to neutralize the threat was to assault that building directly. but it meant crossing 30 yards of open ground under heavy fire. "Thompson, Williams, get Rodriguez and the other wounded to that wall," Sarah ordered, pointing to a thick stone barrier that would provide better protection. "I'm going to take the fight to them." Her Marines immediately protested, but Sarah had already made up her mind. She had spotted a weakness in the enemy's position, a blind spot created by the building's architecture that would allow her to approach unseen if she moved fast enough. Sarah gathered every grenade she could carry and checked her rifle one last time. She looked at her Marines, these young men who had followed her into hell without question. "Take care of each other," she said simply. Then, without waiting for a response, she sprinted from cover toward the enemy position. The enemy fighters were so focused on the Marines in the courtyard that they didn't notice Sarah's flanking maneuver until it was almost too late. She reached the base of the building and began climbing an external staircase, her heart pounding but her hands steady. These were the moments that separated good leaders from great ones, the willingness to sacrifice everything for the people who trusted you. As Sarah reached the second floor, enemy fighters finally spotted her. Bullets whizzed past her head as she dove through a window into the building. Inside, she found herself facing 4 armed insurgents. The next few minutes became a blur of gunfire, explosions, and desperate hand-to-hand combat. Sarah fought with the ferocity of someone protecting her family, because that's exactly what she was doing. She managed to eliminate 3 of the fighters and severely wound the 4th, but not without cost. Sarah had taken a bullet in her shoulder and another in her abdomen. She could feel her strength ebbing away, but the enemy position was neutralized. Her Marines in the courtyard were safe, and rescue helicopters were finally approaching. Sarah dragged herself to the window to signal the evacuation teams, knowing that she had accomplished her mission but uncertain whether she would live to see her Marines reach safety. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived just as Sarah collapsed from blood loss. Her Marines had secured the landing zone and were frantically calling for her over the radio. When they finally reached the building where she had made her heroic stand, they found her unconscious but alive, surrounded by the evidence of her incredible courage. Rodriguez, despite his own wounds, refused to leave Sarah's side during the helicopter ride to the field hospital. "She saved all of us," he kept repeating to the medics. "She saved all of us." The other Marines sat in stunned silence, processing what their captain had done. They had always known Sarah was special, but what they had witnessed that day transcended anything they had imagined possible. At the field hospital, military surgeons worked frantically to save Sarah's life. The bullet wounds were severe, and she had lost a dangerous amount of blood. For 18 hours, her condition remained critical. Her Marines waited outside the medical tent, refusing to leave despite orders to rest and recover from their own injuries. They took turns keeping vigil, sharing stories about their captain and praying for her recovery. Word of Sarah's heroic actions spread quickly through the military community. The mission debrief revealed the full scope of what she had accomplished. Not only had she saved her entire unit from certain death, but her assault on the enemy position had also led to the capture of valuable intelligence that would prevent future attacks on civilian targets. The terrorist leader they had been hunting was found among the dead in the building Sarah had single-handedly cleared. On the 3rd day, Sarah briefly regained consciousness. Her first words were not about her pain or her condition, but about her Marines. "Are they safe? Are my Marines okay?" When Rodriguez leaned over her bed and assured her that everyone had made it out alive because of her actions, tears rolled down Sarah's face. She had kept her promise to bring them home, but Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate despite the medical team's best efforts. The combination of blood loss, infection, and trauma was too much for her body to overcome. As her vital signs weakened, the doctors called her family and commanding officers. Her Marines refused to leave the hospital, maintaining their vigil with the dedication that Sarah had inspired in them throughout their service together. Captain Sarah Martinez died on a Thursday morning, surrounded by the Marines she had given her life to protect. Her hand was held by Rodriguez, who whispered words of gratitude and love as she took her final breath. The entire medical facility fell silent as word spread that they had lost not just an officer, but a true hero who embodied everything the Marine Corps represented. The news of Sarah's death traveled across military bases around the world within hours. Her story became legendary. The captain who charged alone into enemy fire to save her Marines who chose certain death over the possibility of losing even one of the soldiers under her command. In mess halls and barracks, Marines shared the story of Sarah Martinez with pride and reverence, knowing that her example would inspire generations of warriors to come. Sarah's body was prepared for the journey home with the highest honors. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her ribbons and medals arranged with meticulous care. The Marines she had saved took turns standing guard over her casket, a final gesture of respect for the woman who had considered their lives more valuable than her own. Each man struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why they were alive when their heroic captain was not. The flight home was the longest journey Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, and the other survivors had ever taken. They accompanied Sarah's casket back to Dover Air Force Base, where her parents waited with tears in their eyes and pride in their hearts. Her father, the old soldier who had taught her about honor and duty, stood at attention as his daughter's flag-draped casket was carried from the plane. At Camp Pendleton, the entire Marine base prepared for Sarah's funeral. Word had spread throughout the military community, and Marines from across the country requested permission to attend the service. Officers who had never met Sarah personally felt compelled to pay their respects to a fellow Marine who had lived and died according to the highest ideals of their service. The base chaplain worked with Sarah's family and her Marines to plan a ceremony worthy of her sacrifice. They decided to hold the service at the base chapel, followed by burial at Arlington National Cemetery, where Sarah would rest among America's greatest heroes. What none of them anticipated was the massive outpouring of respect and gratitude that would transform Sarah's funeral into one of the most moving military ceremonies in recent memory. On the morning of Sarah's funeral, something extraordinary happened at Camp Pendleton. As the ceremony was set to begin, Marines began arriving in numbers nobody had expected. They came from bases across California, from Nevada, from Arizona, and beyond. Active duty Marines, reservists, and retired veterans all felt compelled to honor Captain Sarah Martinez. What started as a standard military funeral became something unprecedented. By the time the service began, over 500 Marines had gathered at the chapel. They stood in perfect formation, their dress blue uniforms creating a sea of honor and respect. Many had driven through the night to be there. Others had taken emergency leave. Some had not worn their dress blues in years, but felt called to honor a fellow Marine who had embodied everything they believed in. The chaplain's voice carried across the silent assembly as he spoke about Sarah's life and sacrifice. He talked about her childhood dreams of service, her dedication to her Marines, and her final act of heroism. Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams each spoke about their captain, their voices breaking as they described the woman who had saved their lives and the lives of dozens of other Marines. When the time came for the final salute, something magical happened. Without any command or coordination, all 500 Marines came to attention as one. The sound of their synchronized movement was like thunder rolling across the base. As the honor guard presented Sarah's flag to her parents, 500 white-gloved hands rose in perfect unison, holding their salute until the ceremony concluded. Sarah's father later said that seeing 500 Marines stand in honor of his daughter was the most beautiful and heartbreaking sight he had ever witnessed. These warriors, trained to be tough and emotionless, stood with tears streaming down their faces as they paid tribute to a leader who had shown them what true courage looked like. The story of Sarah's funeral spread far beyond the military community. News outlets picked up the story of the captain who died protecting her Marines and the 500 Marines who stood tall to honor her memory. Her example inspired countless young Americans to consider military service, and her story became required reading at military academies across the country. Today, a memorial stands at Camp Pendleton bearing Sarah's name and the names of the Marines she saved. Every year on the anniversary of her death, Marines gather there to remember Captain Sarah Martinez, the officer who proved that true leadership means being willing to give everything for the people who trust you to bring them home. Her legacy lives on in every Marine who chooses courage over comfort, service over self, and love of country over love of life.